This week, we welcome Al Ghous, Head of Security at ServiceMax, to discuss startup security. In the Leadership and Communications section, unexpected companies produce some of the best CEOs, creating a no-blame culture. The guy who invented Inbox Zero says we're all doing it wrong, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Do you know what the biggest cyber risk is for your organization? It's the browser, and your users are in it all the time. Every time a link is clicked, untrusted web code enters your network and runs on your machine, exposing you to risk. What if users had full access to the web but never touched web code? You'd have all the benefit of the web and none of the risk. That's why Authenticate built Silo. It's a browser built in the cloud that runs all web content in a remote, isolated browser that never touches your network or device. With a simple click, your organization is fully protected from all web exploits. Find out more at securityweekly.com/authenticate. That's authentic number 8.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 158, recorded January 13th, 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado. And joining me remotely from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island are my co-hosts, Mr. Paul Asadorian and Mr. Jason Albuquerque.
Hey, how you doing, Matt?
What's going on, Matt? It's good to be here.
Yes, well, we didn't have to worry about Patriots playing, but we did have some good football games this weekend. So
Exactly.
Great football games.
They were.
good. Yeah, that's how I do my prep. So for people who don't know, Sundays when football is on, I do my prep in front of the games. It allows me to do my prep, but also get to watch parts of the game without getting yelled.
A lot of commercials.
Plenty of fill-in time.
Mm-hmm.
Attend RSA Conference 2020, February 24th to 28th, and join thousands of security professionals, forward-thinking innovators, and solution providers for 5 days of actionable learning, inspiring conversation, and breakthrough ideas. Register before January 24th and save $900 on a full conference pass. You can also save an extra $150 with our discount code. Please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2020 to register. We will also be recording in Broadcast Alley at RSA Conference 2020. You can visit that same landing page /RSAC 2020 to book your micro interview or sponsor one of these enterprise shows, which we will be recording live from the conference. All right, let's get to our guest. Al Ghous is the head of security at ServiceMax, a cloud platform focused on field service management and automation. Prior to ServiceMax, Al was responsible for platform, product, and IoT security for GE Digital, which is where Al and I originally met. Al's been in cybersecurity for 20 years, contributing in different capacities from product security and risk management to solution consulting and security architecture. Al is also active in the cybersecurity industry and part of several industry organizations and consortiums, as well as serving on multiple advisory boards. Al, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thanks, guys. Good to be here.
I think we interviewed on Application Security Weekly. It's been well over a year. And I think a lot of that had to do with some of the work we were doing at Layered Insight and container security and some of the stuff that GE Digital was doing at the time. So it's good to have you on this show because we're going to talk, kind of more around security, startup security. But before we get into that, give people a little bit of background. How did you get into security? How did you end up, becoming head of security at ServiceMax? I always like to understand how people got into the industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I graduated college. I'm not going to date myself, way back, and at that time there was no job in the field that I got my degree in. There were no jobs, and it was pretty dismal. So I hooked up with one of the big 4 or 5, whatever you want to call it. They just hired people that had potential and wanted to learn, do different things. So I started doing development for them, building enterprise type applications. And then one thing led to another. I started getting into security, and this is now, I date myself a little bit, early 2000s, late 1999, around that time. dot com boom, all that was happening, and security was a thing that was being more and more integrated into enterprises. And so I started doing security, went from a couple of big four, big five to boutiques, doing consulting, implementations, training, etc. And then from there, just moved on to doing enterprise type security stuff for large enterprise software companies. Got into healthcare, but throughout all this, I started really at the bottom, doing, like I said, started doing development, then start doing help desk, getting into infrastructure and system security, up to network administration, network design, and then ultimately to security. And then, once I got into security, then it was all about like, okay, I have like all these different things I could be doing, different security domains, risk management, application security, infrastructure security. So I did a little bit of pretty much everything, kind of built my way, built my repertoire, and moved up the ladder, so to speak. Got some good experience in healthcare. Then really got into product security, doing cloud products and SaaS, and again, building programs and security capabilities within large organizations, and sometimes medium to small organizations, and that led me up to here. So I think I pretty much have done it all, so to speak, and here I am.
Usually, when you're the master of all, or jack of all trades, master of none, you don't always get to that level, right? Sometimes we get too wide in our careers, but for you, that experience kind of helped you get to where you are today at ServiceMax.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's important to, when you get to this level, that you have a good understanding of the entire stack. And I just don't mean technology stack. I'm talking about, process, certifications, compliance, privacy, and of course, your traditional, 7-layer burrito, whatever you want to call it, working your way from the, lower in the stack all the way up to the application layer, and then so forth. So, it's important for us to have the breadth and also the depth in some areas. Look, everybody specializes in something, right? Even though when you get to this level, you're pretty wide in terms of your breadth. You got to have some depth in certain areas. And, for me, like I said, I got my start in development, so application security, and I would say probably risk management is key for me. Those are the areas that I've been focusing on. Because at the end of the day, I look at us as more of risk practitioners really than information security or cybersecurity practitioners. Our job is to identify risk and find ways of mitigating risk for the organization, and help do that in a very cost-effective way with the context of business behind you. So that's kind of what I see as our job. And so I focused on risk more or less over the years, and then application security, I would say.
Got it. Yeah, we have a show called Security and Compliance Weekly that we do tomorrow on Tuesdays. And one of the common themes between security and compliance is this concept of risk and risk management and understanding risk. And I think it is a very important skill set for CISOs to have, because if you are truly going to become engage with the business and really become a business partner to the overall business, understanding the business and potential risks associated with the business are something that you have to understand and also be able to communicate and work with the other executives on in the business. Absolutely.
And do it in a very cost-effective way, right? I mean, as security practitioners, we want to do everything. We want to spend money where we feel like we need to, but we always get challenged in terms of, okay, you have so much budget, how can you make that budget? How can you extend that to the entire year and not spend it all up front, and really be able to prioritize? I think, with the concept of risk, prioritization becomes really key. So we have to be able to prioritize based on, like I said, context of business and how much risk the business is willing to assume or accept, how you implement controls and close out some of the gaps. And so I think it all boils down to risk, no matter whether you're an application security expert or infrastructure or privacy, whatever the case. It all boils down to risk. That's what we're here to do. We're here to identify risk and reduce risk for the organization, I think.
Right. I don't want to monopolize everything. I want to give Jason and Paul a chance to ask you a couple questions.
Yeah, Al, when you are coaching startups and have advice for them, what's their thinking? Because if I think about if I were to create a startup tomorrow, like security probably wouldn't be top of mind? How do you kind of bring them around to considering all things security?
Yeah, that's exactly what you're thinking. I mean, their priorities are a little different than ours, right? Their priority is go to market, build their product, go to market, and generate revenue, right, for themselves and for their investors. Security becomes really an afterthought. The way I explain it to them is, we always start off with the product. Is the product viable? What would you do differently, et cetera, et cetera. And I give them advice on the product side. But then if I don't see them regurgitate in terms of, okay, now what do I need to do from a security perspective? I make it a point to remind them, tell them, look, you're going to sell a product, and it's great that you're going to go out and get some design partners and work with them, and they're willing to help you and you help them. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to sell to somebody, whether it's a small, medium, or large enterprise. You can't forget about security, because what happens is, when you go over the enterprise type customers, you may have a viable product, they may love your product, but once they get to the vendor security assessment, third party risk management process, a program that they have, you're gonna fail. And if you don't at least do the bare minimum, the basics, it's gonna show, and you're gonna be pretty much stalled at that point. So it behooves you to do some basics, and I'm talking about real basics, like manage your credentials appropriately, right, internally, implement MFA where you can, harden your systems, enable automatic updates, just the basic stuff. So I try to.
Well, it's really there's two facets to that, Al. Right? There's product security, and then there's internal IT security.
Right.
And oftentimes those are two very different things, right? I think much of what you just mentioned is make sure your own IT security is in order, because that could come into question as you start to do business with different types and larger enterprises. Correct?
Right. It's all about just building the basic foundation when it comes to backend security. You can call it IT security, enterprise security, but we don't. I don't dismiss product security by any means. Part of building secure products is making sure you're I don't want to say embedding security, but developing with the security mindset, and by that I mean just looking at it from basic design principles, defensive coding strategies, making sure that you do some threat analysis, threat modeling. I mean, some of these concepts may be foreign to developers at that early stage, but there's resources that I point them to, so they can pick up new skills and be able to actually build with security in mind. And then then your traditional dynamic, static, open source assessment. Again,
Right.
there's a lot of free tools out there, open source tools that they could be using. So it's a combination of building secure, resilient products on one hand, and then, like you said, making sure that your backend controls, your basic security hygiene is where it needs to be, so that you can go out and seek those enterprise customers and be able to pass muster when it comes to their third-party vendor assessment programs.
And their own regulatory compliance. I mean, this is a page right out of Jason's book, right? If I'm creating a product and I'm in a startup, I probably, unless my product is directly addressing some sort of compliance, I probably think compliance and auditing is pretty boring, right? Exactly. And I don't realize that if I make it really difficult for my customers to become compliant with any number of standards, that I'm going to start falling down on the list in terms of vendors that they're going to use and purchase and or renew.
No, agreed.
Did you agree?
Oh, well, yeah, 100%. And I would even say not just build with security in mind, buy with security in mind, right? Because as a startup, I know quite a few startups that are leveraging cloud first as their mentality, right? Yeah. They want to push everything to the cloud as much as they possibly can. They don't want to own infrastructure. They don't want to own any compute, right? So from that perspective, I think from a startup side of the house, you really need to understand what cloud model are you moving into. Are you moving into an infrastructure as a service?
Don't take the advice on the internet.
A UCaaS, right? Honestly, right? Because
we were just talking about that before the show.
Absolutely.
Like, they show you how to use this service and deploy it.
Yep.
But there's no security in mind whatsoever. And if you start pushing a product on top of that, your next big customer is going to go, yeah, no, I can't deploy your product because it's not in compliance with whatever I need to be in compliance with.
Because as a leader within the organization, talking about risk management, you need to understand the risk of going with these platforms, whether it's IaaS, SaaS, platform as a service, if you're unified communications as a service, because you need to know what your responsibility is as a customer to that your vendor. And
Right.
what do you need to be doing to secure that platform? Because organizations like mine, we're not only looking at, our vendors' third-party, risk. We're looking at fourth party. We're looking at the vendor, right? We're going down that level of compliance and security and risk assessment for our customers.
Absolutely. And here's how things go down sometimes, right? So a lot of these startups, founders come in, they're SaaS, right? Just to keep it simple. They have a product in AWS or Azure. Typically it's AWS first. And they want to host, whatever it is that they're providing to you as a customer, whatever service it is. And sometimes that requires sending data there. And the conversation we automatically get into when it comes to like POC time is, okay, happy to do a POC, but I really can't use your SaaS, right? Because you don't have the basic security foundation built in. You haven't really done your due diligence. So if you really want to do a POC, you have to do it on premise, so to speak, on my AWS instance or Azure instance or GCP. And that breaks down their whole model at that point. Right? Then they have to sit down and package everything into, AMI or something to give to you so that you can deploy it in your AWS instance. And then they have to, have some kind of secure access with MFA and all that good stuff to be able to support you and, kind of shepherd you along the POC. Well, that defeats their whole, that's against their business model when it comes to SaaS. You don't want to do that. So it really, like I said, it behooves them to implement the basics so that at least when it comes to POC time, customers feel comfortable where they can say, okay, I'm okay using your SaaS because you have taken these steps. And at that early stage, when we're talking about, startups, we're talking about like, seed, Series A plus maybe, and they're not going to be able to go and get the compliance certifications, the SOC 2s and the ISOs and, all that stuff. So, what I tell them is just start with the basics, do the basics, show that you've built the foundation, you're working towards, greater security hygiene, improve security hygiene down the line as you grow and your company grows. At least that way they can start doing POCs with you and not have to force you to, provide them packages that you can deploy in your AWS instance or Azure instance.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that trips up startups is you start to get some momentum, and then you get the proverbial question, "Where's your SOC 2?" And they're like completely befuddled because they haven't thought about even the type 1. What are the different controls I need to be in place, let alone a full type 2 certification? But if you're SaaS and you're running in the cloud, you're going to get asked for a SOC 2 type 2 at some point down the path of a sales cycle. And if you're not prepared for it, it's hard for you to be ready to, one, answer the questions of the different controls that you have in place, like you said, Al, but then let alone showing, it takes time. These programs don't happen overnight. I mean, these take a year, year and a half, sometimes 2 years to go through the certification process to produce that piece of paper to those large enterprises before they're going to do business with you. So you got to think about it earlier. You're going to get blindsided.
No, absolutely. I mean, just SOC 2 Type 2 is at least a 6-month period in terms of having controls and operations so that they can test it and yeah. So it's and like I said, a lot of these, almost all these small startups, they don't have security experts on staff, right? So they don't have anybody that they can rely on. They can't afford to bring somebody in just to do security. So it really has to be part of the culture, part of what everybody does, and everybody has to pitch in. But I also recommend to them that they should have at least some kind of an advisor, somebody that can just help them from a security perspective and kind of help them navigate through all these, compliance, privacy waters, so to speak, and make sure that, one, they're not taking on more than they can chew, and then second, they're at least doing the basics so that they can instill some confidence in their customers, potential customers, that they're doing the right thing, so that they can start to attract the large enterprise customers and generate revenue.
It's a trade-off between time to market and features versus security, right? The more security that you've got to build in from the start, my feeling is the longer that's going to take to build, test, and push out into that next version. So it's a balancing act, right? You don't want to go all in and say, I'm going to build out all the security controls and all the security stuff into version 1 of my product because I think your time to market is going to lag. But you also don't want to ignore it completely because then you have too much technical debt. Al, how do you coach folks on how to balance between those two?
So the good thing is I recognize this amongst my peers in the industry. There's a close group of us in the Bay Area here. And we all where we realized this. There's a lot of good. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of good content out there in terms of how to achieve security or how to build security programs from a startup's perspective. There's a lot of great folks out there that have put guidelines and recommendations. But typically they're coming from either a small, mid-size, or large organization perspective. A group of us here in the Bay Area got together a while back and realized the same exact challenge that you just pointed out. How do you balance go to market in terms of building security into your product and building security controls and capabilities on your backend systems and processes so that you can attract those large customers. And what we came up with was a very methodic approach to starting to build security, but really start from the bottom up. Just build the foundation, right? Build the building blocks, and then build on top of that based on your business model, right? It was you may be a fintech startup, or you may be a health tech, or B2B or B2C, depending on where you are. We started to build what's called security for startups. It's a framework. It's some guidelines some guidance that we are providing, and it really starts with a simple questionnaire. There's a survey that founders can go in and complete, and it really asks them the basic questions like, what is important to you in terms of your business? Is it IP? Is it customer data? Are you full SaaS? Are you IaaS? Are you PaaS? The things that you guys talked about. And as they complete that, it gives them a very reasonable set of controls with some great detail in terms of how they can go about and start building these capabilities internally. And it takes into account traditional enterprise IT security as well as product security. And so it's open source. We welcome feedback. There's a Slack channel that founders can get on and communicate with us in terms of questions. If you have any questions, follow-ups, recommendations, anybody have recommendations. We try to keep the changes a bit more, I guess you could say, controlled. So, the core group of CISOs like myself, my peers, are able to make changes, but it's all based on, feedback from the community and recommendations that they're making. So, so the short answer is, yes, we realize that, by helping them, we're really helping us because there are really great companies out there. We want to be able to use their products, but, we got to eat our own dog food too. We can't just, give ourselves exceptions and not the HR.
Right.
Or the
and what I love about that is giving folks a process and a roadmap, even if they're not going to implement 80% of the things that are in there right away, right? You know that. But what it does, if I'm a startup, it tells me thinking about security is important in pretty much every decision I'm making as a new startup, right? And an example, and one that we run into when we're developing our own application and making decisions as to where it's going to go, is what technology do I use? Is that a cloud service? What technology do I use for the front end, right?
Right.
I think historically, if we leave security out, those decisions are made for speed to go to market, for performance of the application itself, right? Maybe some agility. Can I easily move on or off, right? If you look at Angular versus Vue versus React, those are the decisions. But you throw security into the mix, right? Keith Hilda just put that on Twitter and was like, well, yeah, you consider React because it's much harder to introduce some of the vulnerabilities, right? And if that's a factor in the framework you've chosen, maybe you take a little bit of a learning curve hit in the beginning, but moving forward, now you've got a lot less security stuff to deal with as you progress forward because, like Al's producing this roadmap, right? This process for you to include security in your decision making. That doesn't mean you ignore security in every decision. Doesn't mean you include all the security in every decision, right? It helps you balance those.
And the tool is awesome. I mean, in preparation for the show, I actually went out there and I put my mock startup through this tool, right? I pretended to be a startup and I just, I fed information through the tool. And coming out of it, I mean, it was absolutely incredible, right? So the checklist that comes out of it, you actually get to pick what stage you're in. Are you seed? Are you Series A plus, right? And it gives you an order of magnitude of what you're looking at. And then you can check a domain, right? So it actually starts slimming the list down or opening the list up to more controls if you're corporate or if you're product infrastructure or if you're straight product. But the part I like the most is that when it actually starts to give you all of the different controls you should be looking at and the suggestions, it actually gives you tools and examples of tools that you can be leveraging, right? So for MFA, it actually, it gives you things like Okta, YubiKey, Google Authenticator, and saying, here are some recommendations of tools you can look at, to kind of give you that head start. And I love the fact that you can actually roadmap your maturity too. It's great. The tool is awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was important for us for it to be actionable. Like I said, there's a lot of good content out there, but it was important for us to make sure that we provide some examples that we've used internally, that we've vetted. We didn't want to go in public and say, we vetted these tools and you should use these. We don't want to force anybody to do anything, but it was important for us to put this out there and make sure that it's actionable, so they can actually use it. So and yeah, like I said, there's a Slack channel. So if anybody has any recommendations, questions, there's a core group of us. I'm not going to mention names. There's just too many to give credit to, but security like-minded people like myself just got together. CISOs of small, mid-sized, large organizations, as well as some investor friends of ours, and put this together, and hopefully it's beneficial for everybody in terms of really the goal is, like I said, is to help the community, help the startup community, but help ourselves as well, because like I said, we do want to use these products, very viable products. They're cutting edge, and they're looking at solving old problems in terms of like vulnerability management and asset management in a lot of different ways. They have really great products, viable, but we want to be able to use them, and sometimes we find that we can't because of their lack of security hygiene.
Yeah. One of the things I like is some of the categories you broke down are non-traditional, right? So I'm a big app user data guy, so you've got a whole section on application and identity and access management. Fantastic, because you've got to get that under control. Data kind of gets put in a governance section. So you take privacy and some of the governance concerns, put them there. You have a huge section on resiliency, and I think this is the domain that people forget the most, especially in a cloud environment. You're like, I'm running in the cloud, I'm fine, right? But resiliency is a big component of what you guys put into this checklist, which I think a lot of us overlook, which I think I wanted to point out. And then, look, if you're doing seed and product, there's not a lot of infrastructure controls in there, right? I think sometimes we focus a lot on the infrastructure controls first, but they may not be applicable in a startup that's running in the cloud and don't have a lot of infrastructure. So it's just unique how you categorize the different controls and how you kind of manage those through the different phases of where you are as a business and the different domains you're trying to address. I thought it was really intuitive.
Yeah, and that's where the brain trust came in, right? It wasn't just one person sitting down and doing this, or a couple of people. Literally, it was, at least, probably 6 to 10 of us that just sat down and said, look, let's brainstorm. And it literally took us almost a year to do this, to be honest with you. As CISOs, security folks that have been around for a while, we're highly opinionated. We have a lot of, very passionate about what we do. So there's a lot of disagreements, which was really great because we flushed out a lot of different things. We wanted to put something out there that helped small, mid-sized, and large organizations. But we also wanted to, like you said, help individuals think a little bit differently about security, right? We always think of security as being, proactive, a little sprinkle of incident response, being reactive, et cetera. But resiliency is really about what do you do, when, SHTF, for example, right? What do you do? Incident response aside, you have to think about business continuity, disaster recovery, communicating to your customers. How do you communicate to your customers? So all those things, RPOs, RTOs, all those things come together. And a lot of this is not really traditional security, but, we have to put it out there because we want them to develop secure and resilient products. And a lot of them are, like you said, SaaS, IaaS, or PaaS in some cases as well.
For those listening, I did put it in the show notes, but it's security4startups.com. That's the URL we've been talking about. So if you're interested in getting more information about what security controls should I put in place as a startup, go to security4startups.com. Al, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thanks, Al.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks,
Good to
Al.
be here. Guys.
Nice to meet you.
All right. Take care.
We'll take a quick break, and then we'll cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.